Hi, I'm David Tracy with Jalopnik. I'm here at the Detroit Auto Show in front of the 2019 Mercedes-Benz G-Class. I somehow convinced the head engineer for the G-Class to crawl underneath this legendary off-roader to get some hardware. So we're going to do that now. All right, well, I'm here with Oliver Metzger, head of engineering for G-Class.
Hi, David.
Well, one of the biggest changes for the new G-Class is the independent front suspension. It's been 40 years with a solid front axle, so why the independent suspension?
Main target for us was to improve the on-road performance of the vehicle. I think you're absolutely right. If you go to an off-road vehicle, you should go and choose a rigid front axle. But if you want to improve on-road performance, you got very quick to the limit with a rigid front axle. So for us, there was no question to change the front axle concept. We decided for a double wishbone front axle, which allows us to put the lower control arm as much as possible upwards for more ground clearance.
So most cars with independent front suspensions, there's a cradle, a subframe in between.
Exactly, and we don't have a cradle because the main task of a cradle is to isolate noise vibrations, right, and also to give a little bit more stiffness to the whole front suspension. So these main tasks are already done by the ground concept, right, itself.
You've got rubber isolators between the two.
A cradle would just cost us ground clearance. So what we did, we put the wishbone and directly bolted onto the leather frame, which allows us to indicate the forces directly to the leather frame. So the next thing, we put a very high basis of the bearings, and a high basis means low forces.
We're gonna go check out some other tech. All right, so speaking of the front suspension, you mentioned a strut brace of some sort.
Yes, we had the independent front axle, and that the control arms have a good basis, so the distance between upper and lower control arm is quite large. To give enough stiffness and a precise wheel guidance to the whole system, it's necessary to have this bar that goes from the right-hand top mount to the left-hand top mount. So this gives a lot of stiffness, not only to the suspension, but also to the frame itself. These are all the efforts we have done for the independent front axle for the G-Class to stay top of the line in the off-road performance.
You know, one thing that I wasn't going to ask about, but now that I see it here, is this air intake sort of goes into the fender.
Yeah, that's one thing. We also increased the wading depth of the vehicle. Yeah, so the predecessor had a wading depth of 600 millimeters, and we could improve it to 700 millimeters. And to do that, we have the air intakes for the engine in the front, and we have a wading sensor in the car. So, and the wading sensor senses water, and as soon as it senses water, we have a flap.
Oh, and it closes the flap?
And then we have a secondary air intake channel, which you can see here. So immediately, if you go into the water, the engine gets his air from up here, and it comes from behind the headlamps.
You normally pull from behind the grill, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And but you only pull from here when you're in water, right?
If the water is higher than the 600 millimeters, yeah, then we just close the flap to prevent engine damage. And normally, of course, we took the air from here because you have a better pressure level in the front of the vehicle.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can sort of, the oncoming airflow can kind of force itself into the engine.
Exactly, yeah.
So a solid axle here still, huh?
Yeah, it's a solid axle. We stayed with this in the rear because this car can carry a lot of payload. We can have about 700 kilograms of payload. So this axle is the perfect match for our car.
There is no sway bar in the back here, and that was done specifically for a better ramp travel index, so more articulation.
We modified it so that it fits very good to the new front axle system. And you can see that on the longitudinal links.
Yeah, right.
So what you see here now is a 5-link rigid axle.
Is that different than the old model? The 5-link suspension, is it similar?
No, we had a 3-link.
Oh, okay.
So, and we put now a 5-link to be more precise in the wheel guide.
Is it a handling thing, or?
Yeah, it also for on-road performance as well, but also for a better control off-road.
Okay, is there still lots of articulation here on this rear axle?
Yeah, it is. So we increased also here the wheel travel by almost 140 millimeters.
Okay.
So we are about 250 mils of wheel travel in the rear.
And these shocks here, what can you tell me about these? These are very prominent. Remote reservoir here?
That's our adaptive damping system.
Okay.
And these valves, these magnetic valves, they control the damper setting in real time. So if you have a very small high frequency articulation, it works completely different than if you have a very let's say low frequency but high wheel travel.
Awesome. Well, great. There it is. So solid rear axle, independent front suspension, better on-road handling, more ground clearance overall, right?
About 6 millimeters more on the most lower point of the center gearbox. So we increased not only the ground clearance, we also increased the ramp over angle in the front and in the rear, also the brake over angle, although we enlarged the wheelbase.
Right.
And we enlarged the track width by 120 millimeters.
All right, so a lot of changes to the G-Class. Oliver Metzger, head of development for the G-Class. Thank you so much for crawling around down here with me.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Oh man, well, I ruined my jacket in the process, but I got to crawl underneath the new G-Wagen with head of development. Doesn't get any cooler than that. We got to see some off-road hardware. Yeah, that was awesome. David Tracy from Jalopnik, reporting from Detroit. This is probably an interesting interview compared to the normal ones, right?